It's the 15th of the 4th, 2024. And in today's F1 news, we're less than 7 days away from the Chinese Grand Prix. And critically for one Sir Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton, that means that he's now gone 861 days without a Grand Prix victory. Oof. And of the top drivers, all excluding Fernando Alonso, that's the most. Charles Leclerc's victory drought 644 days, George Russell's 518, Checo Perez 350, Carlos Sainz 21, Max Verstappen, well, couple of weeks. And this begs the question, of course, is the man from Stevenage past it? That's a question that Dutch pundit Michael Bleekemolen has attempted to answer. The Dutch racing driver has been scathing in his condemnation, saying that it's all just so bad. I think he's just past his prime. Things aren't going well for him at the moment either. I just don't see the point anymore. Oof, the humanity. And on the man from Stevenage's move to Ferrari, Bleekemolen continues that maybe he'll end up in the top 2 or 3. For him, that could be possible, but that won't be easy, although it would be nice. I just don't see it happening. And to that point, Lewis Hamilton evangelists around the world will cry foul. There is no evidence that speaks to this other than, of course, statistical. Because Formula One is nothing if not a young man's game. Lewis Hamilton will be 40 years old at the time when he joins Ferrari, and only 4 champions have ever won at that age or older. Those being, of course, Farina, Fangio, Brabham and Hill. Rarefied air indeed. But there are those, of course, who will argue that if you give Lewis Hamilton the machinery, he will get it done. Fernando Alonso at the ripe old age of 42 is testament to that. Lest we forget, it's 2024 now. Research and medicine has taken a step forward. Please see LeBron James and Tom Brady, for they are testament to this. To this thesis, Bleekemolen's not buying, because the case against Hamilton, he posits, is two-pronged. That the Brit is past his prime, and that he's going against the generational talent that is Max Verstappen. And on Max's achievements, the Dutch racing driver isn't surprised. Saying of Verstappen's success, I fully expected this. I've always said that. Max is simply the best, and you can always see this, especially at the start of the race. Because within a couple of laps of the start, he's already seconds down the road, and you can't say that's just the car, because Perez drives in the same machinery and he can't do that. Bleekemolen continues, there's always one that stands out, and you see this throughout the racing classes. There is always one that can do it better than the rest, and often it has nothing to do with the car. It's the fact that they can handle everything just a bit more adeptly. And it's because of this that I don't see anyone beating Max. As a characterisation, to say this is ominous and foreboding for the other 19 is an understatement. But if we're talking about the Chinese Grand Prix as our focus, one Fernando Alonso begs to differ. The Spaniard believes that Aston Martin have a secret weapon that they're capable of leveraging to get some serious success at the Chinese Grand Prix. Alonso thinks that Aston's DRS is super powerful, and that China, this could be a factor. Alonso cites the long corners at China in addition to a very long straight. We have a very powerful DRS, Alonso says, and maybe this will help us there. China, says Fernando, is a front limited circuit. I expect Ferrari to be very quick there. But of the DRS, Fernando says when you have a little bit of a deficit on pace, it always gives you that opportunity. Add into that equation mixed weather conditions and a sprint race weekend, and the outcome of the Chinese Grand Prix is in the hands of the gods. And speaking of sprint race weekend, Max Verstappen post the Japanese Grand Prix was quite vocal in his opposition. The 3 soon-to-be 4-time champs said by virtue of the fact that we haven't been at the Chinese Grand Prix for so long, the requisite level of due diligence simply isn't possible in one free practice. Carlos Sainz too was of a similar opinion, saying that since we were there last, they've resurfaced the track. Variables have changed. Lest we forget that the rules and regulations are so finicky around plank wear et al. That one free practice session alone simply doesn't give teams, engineers and drivers the time that they need. Expect then post-race scrutineering and plank wear to be hot topics at this weekend's Chinese Grand Prix. And in other F1 news, it was reported late last week that one David Sanchez has left McLaren. Sanchez cited as his reasons for leaving that there was a mismatch between the role on paper and reality. And some say to McLaren that this is a massive blow, since Sanchez was the man that was meant to take them on, bring them to the next level. Autosport speculate to the contrary, however, saying that F1 teams, McLaren in particular, are a moving beast, that it's very rare that an F1 job spec on paper matches its reality, and that as human resources go, F1 teams are ever evolving beasts. Org structures fluid then. Autosport cites Rob Marshall as an example, who joined McLaren in January of 2024, that his job now is very different to what it was then. Marshall, though, is still at McLaren. He hasn't left. So what was the real reason why Sanchez left then? Well, Autosport speculates that it was part ego, part team circumstance, and in large part due to the evolution of the team. The split, though, between Stella and Sanchez was an amicable one. Stella was glowing in his praise of Sanchez, speaking of his impact in the short space of time that he'd been there. Stella obviously not keen to throw the outgoing Sanchez under the bus, bearing in mind they'd collaborated previously at Scuderia Ferrari. Some say of Sanchez's departure that McLaren should come in for some praise. If F1 is a story told in tense, then a failed working relationship is something that no F1 team has time for. Fail fast then is the modus operandi. And as far as Sanchez's hiatus from F1, well, that might be brief, because the Enstone team known as Alpine are keen to hire more intelligence, more market leading personnel, because these are bleak times for Alpine, writes one Lawrence Barretto. It's been a dismal showing from the French outfit season to date. Currently, lest we forget, they sit bottom of the constructors. Oh, the humanity. Oh, and it gets worse, because Alpine have failed to finish on the lead lap of any one of the first 4 Grand Prix, and out of Q1 season to date they've only done that twice. That's not great. Bruno Famin says, though, that this is the history of our team, previously branded Renault, that at the inception of our project in the 1970s, everybody was laughing at us, but we were strong in those moments, and indeed we used them to reach our goals. Alpine planned for a massive bounce back in 26 on the back of the new rules and regs, and that's because as at 24 they've been left wanting. They're down materially on brake horsepower, because unlike rivals they haven't been able to leverage reliability updates to bridge that power gap. At Alpine, aka Team Enstone, to be sure, there is work still to be done. And in an exclusive interview with motorsport.com, Adrian Newey has talked extensively about this era of F1 and the challenge it's facing in prioritising conflicting demands. Oof. This, says Newey, is where all the conundrums come in, because I think we'd all like naturally aspirated high revving V10s. We all pine for the engines of the early 2000s, but of course they're not fuel efficient, so you have to balance the spectacle versus social responsibility, even though fuel consumption in terms of the pollution that's caused by the sport entire is relatively tiny. The biggest contribution by far is that of people attending races, and in that sense F1 is no different to any other sport. It's the popularisation of it. It's the image. And Jonathan Noble of Motorsport writes that the conundrum to which Newey speaks goes to the heart of F1. This is the Rubik's Cube for which Liberty Media need to solve for. As a sports franchise, how do you walk the fine tightrope between sports and entertainment, between the purity of F1 and the glitz and glam? Newey argues that as a first order priority, cars need to be smaller and lighter, since the cars today in 24 are far too heavy, cumbersome even. Newey says that after having solved for that, only then can you have a conversation about how quick the car should be. But invariably, Newey continues, all cars tend to look slow on TV. In order for the sensations of speed to translate, the cars, well, they need to be properly quick. This conflict, Newey thinks, is something that you can never really square, never really solve for, unless, Newey says, you start to make it really artificial, like WWE. Newey speaking to the availability heuristic of the thing, that we have a habit of only remembering the most memorable of races, the most memorable of championship battles, that we see those races and championships through rose-tinted spectacles, and that the dull ones, they just fade to black, are forgotten about. On F1's beauty, Newey asserts that it's the symbiosis of man and machine. And under the umbrella term of machine, Newey says, you have 2 constituent parts, the engine and the chassis. You don't necessarily need all 3 to be the best. If you have 2 that are the best and one of the 3 is good, then, Newey says, you'll be in a reasonable position. But some would say that as at 2.4, in a Honda power unit, an Adrian Newey designed chassis and a Max Verstappen, that each of those 3 things are market leading pace setting even. And the three concurrently in one package, can you say most dominant ever?